To the outside world, my life with Elena seemed like a dream. I was a dedicated entrepreneur at 34, working tirelessly to build a successful tech startup in San Francisco, and she was a social butterfly who could charm any room with her grace and wit. We had crafted a lifestyle that many admired, a perfect blend of career ambition and family life. Our 2 children, Sophie, 10, and Leo, 8, were the heart of our household, bringing joy that completed our little family. When Sophie and Leo went on a summer trip with my parents to the countryside, Elena proposed something unexpected, a getaway for just the 2 of us. Her proposal caught me off guard. "We need this," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "A chance to reconnect." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because her sudden enthusiasm felt rehearsed. She was 32, and in our years together, I had learned when something didn't feel right. Still, I agreed. I wanted to believe this was her genuine effort to rebuild what we had, that the issues in our relationship were just superficial cracks that could be mended with this trip. Elena threw herself into planning, more intensely than I'd expected. She researched resorts, mapped out activities, and shopped for a whole new wardrobe for the occasion. "Leave it to me," she insisted, her confidence radiating. "I know exactly what we need." At first, her energy was reassuring, but as the date approached, an unsettling feeling gnawed at me. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't place my finger on it. The day of our flight, Elena was glowing. Her outfit was flawless, and her smile dazzling. She moved with a kind of charisma that made people gravitate toward her. As we boarded the plane, I tried to push aside my doubts. Maybe this was exactly what we needed, a fresh start, away from the distractions of our daily routine. We arrived at Oasis Heights, a luxury resort nestled in the hills above Monterey Bay. The place looked like something out of a magazine, an exquisite blend of modern design and natural beauty. Our driver pulled up to the entrance, and my breath caught at the sight of the sprawling estate, the ocean stretching out behind it. "Isn't this perfect?" Elena's voice was laced with excitement, her eyes sparkling. I nodded, genuinely impressed. "It's beautiful," I replied, taking in the polished stone floors, the towering palm trees, and the immaculately dressed staff welcoming us with practiced smiles. Elena beamed, clearly pleased with my reaction. I let myself hope for a moment that her enthusiasm was sincere, that this trip could be the reset we both needed. As we entered the lobby, it was impossible not to be amazed: vaulted ceilings, massive glass windows showcasing the ocean beyond, and the faint scent of tropical flowers in the air. But then, before I could fully relax, something unexpected happened. A familiar laugh echoed through the lobby. "Nathan!" Elena called out excitedly. "Look who's here." I turned to see 3 women entering the lobby, their presence immediately commanding attention. Elena waved them over, her energy shifting as if she had become a different person. "Nathan, you remember Clara, Nina, and Diana, right?" Elena asked with a casual tone, as though she were introducing them at a dinner party rather than during what was supposed to be our intimate getaway. I blinked, momentarily stunned. I vaguely remembered them from some of Elena's social events, but I didn't expect them to be here. "What are they doing here?" I asked, my voice neutral but with a touch of confusion. Elena laughed lightly, brushing it off. "I thought it would be fun to have company. It's always livelier with friends around, don't you think?" "Fun? Livelier?" These were not the words I would have used to describe a trip that was supposed to be a chance for reconnection with my wife. But Elena's tone left no room for argument, and before I could express any concern, she was already deep in conversation with her friends. As I stood there, feeling more like a background character than her husband, I noticed how Elena seemed to come alive in their presence. She was animated, laughing brightly, and confidently gesturing as she spoke. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in years. Yet, it felt distant, like I was watching a stranger. That evening, the four of them dominated the conversation over dinner. Elena and her friends chatted endlessly, sharing stories, gossiping, and basking in their shared experiences. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at the table, feeling like an outsider in my own life. Every time I tried to join in, my attempts were met with polite indifference, and the conversation would be skillfully redirected back to Elena. It wasn't just the conversation that left me feeling disconnected, it was the subtle way she was transforming. Elena, who once made me feel like I was the center of her world, now seemed completely at ease in the spotlight. Her friends praised her endlessly, not just for her beauty or charm, but for what they saw as her ability to hold everything together. "Nathan's lucky I take care of everything," Elena said with a light laugh, tossing her hair back. Clara, Nina, and Diana nodded in agreement, their smiles tinged with smugness. My stomach churned. I wanted to challenge her, to express how I felt pushed aside, but I couldn't. The dynamic had shifted in such a subtle way, and my role seemed to have faded into the background. It was as if the world had become Elena's stage, and I was merely an extra, important only when it suited her. The more she spoke, the more her image as the perfect wife began to feel like an act. The restaurant was magnificent, an open-air space with a stunning view of the ocean under a blanket of stars. The sound of the waves gently lapping against the shore was soothing, but I could barely focus on it. I was consumed with a growing realization, this trip wasn't what I had been promised. It wasn't just about reconnection, it was a performance for her friends, a chance for Elena to be admired and validated. Is Elena really this disconnected from me? I thought, as I watched her laugh with her friends, her smile bright but somewhat empty. Was this trip just a way for her to prove something to herself and to others? As the evening wore on, I felt more like a spectator, silently observing a scene I no longer recognized. Elena's laughter echoed around me, but it no longer felt warm or genuine, it was as if she was performing for an audience. And her friends? They weren't just guests, they were part of the show. After dinner, we walked back to our suite. Elena was still radiant, still glowing, but I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. When we arrived at the room, she immediately started unpacking, her energy as high as ever. She moved around with practiced efficiency, as though everything was fine, as though we were still the couple everyone envied. I sat down on the bed, my mind racing. After a few minutes, I spoke up. "Why didn't you tell me they were coming?" My voice was calm, though I could feel the edge of frustration. Elena didn't look up from her suitcase. "I thought it would be a nice surprise," she replied, her tone casual. "I didn't think it would be a big deal." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to suppress the wave of anger that threatened to rise. "It's not exactly what I had in mind when you said this was a trip for us." She sighed and zipped up her suitcase. "Nathan, you're always so serious. Can't you just relax and enjoy yourself? They won't be around all the time. We'll have our moments." I felt the weight of her words, but more than that, I felt the weight of everything that had been left unsaid between us. I wasn't angry about her friends being here, I was angry that she hadn't even considered how I might feel. How long had I been invisible to her? But instead of pressing the issue, I nodded. "Fine," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "We'll talk about this later." The next morning, Elena was in full vacation mode. She joined Clara, Nina, and Diana by the pool while I stayed in the suite, staring at the ocean through the large windows. I had hoped for a quiet day to gather my thoughts, but instead, I decided to take a closer look at the booking details. Something didn't sit right with me. The nagging feeling had only grown since yesterday. I walked down to the front desk, hoping to clear my mind. The receptionist greeted me warmly, but I could see a faint look of recognition in her eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Lewis. How can I assist you today?" "I just wanted to confirm the details of our reservation," I said, trying to sound casual. "Specifically, the number of rooms and how the billing is set up." She nodded and typed something into her computer. Of course. You have 4 rooms booked under your name, all charged to the card on file. I froze for a moment, unable to believe what I had just heard. 4 rooms? I repeated, keeping my voice steady despite the shock. Yes, sir. Is there a problem? She asked, clearly noticing my confusion. I forced a smile. No, thank you for confirming. I turned away and walked back to the suite, my mind racing. 4 rooms? Elena had arranged this as a romantic getaway, yet here we were, with enough rooms for her and 3 other people. I tried to shake off the thought, but it kept returning, growing darker each time. When I confronted Elena later that evening, she didn't seem surprised by the question. I thought it would be easier to book everything under one card, she said with a shrug, trying to dismiss the situation. We'll sort it out later. The dismissive way she spoke, as if it was nothing, made my frustration grow. It's not about the money, Elena. It's about the fact that you didn't think it was important to tell me. Her eyes briefly flickered with irritation before she poured herself another glass of wine. You're overreacting. It's just a trip. Relax. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had always been patient with her, giving her the benefit of the doubt. But in that moment, I realized something: my patience had been my weakness. She had learned to take advantage of it. The next few days blurred by in a haze of discomfort and silent tension. Elena and her friends continued their lavish indulgences, unaware or perhaps uncaring of the cracks forming between us. Meanwhile, I began to take small steps to regain control. I cancelled the additional charges on my card, informing the resort staff that I would only be responsible for our original booking. The fallout was swift. When Elena tried to book a private cabana for her group, the request was politely declined. It's just a mistake, she laughed awkwardly, trying to brush it off. I'll sort it out. But the damage was done. Clara, Nina, and Diana exchanged glances, their loyalty waning. Their smiles, once warm, now seemed colder, laced with thinly veiled skepticism. The following day, I could sense a shift in the group dynamic. Elena's previously flawless image of the perfect wife and friend was beginning to crack. Her friends had started to notice the shift, and their behavior toward her had grown subtly more distant. That evening, as we sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean, Elena finally brought up the growing tension between us. "Why are you doing this, Nathan?" she asked, her voice trembling with frustration. "Why are you trying to ruin this trip?" "I'm not ruining anything," I replied calmly. "I'm just setting boundaries." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You're punishing me." "No, Elena," I said, meeting her gaze. "I'm holding you accountable for your actions." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "Since when did you decide to start setting boundaries?" "Since you decided this trip wasn't about us," I replied, my voice steady. "Since you turned our marriage into a performance for your friends. Since you stopped respecting me." Elena didn't respond immediately. Instead, she picked up her glass of wine, her posture stiffening as she turned her back to me. "You're being dramatic," she muttered, walking inside. I stayed on the balcony, the sound of the waves crashing below grounding me. My heart was heavy, but I knew I had to make a choice. The road we were on wasn't leading to any reconciliation. It was leading to more of the same, more performances, more manipulation. The next morning, Elena was back to her usual self, joining her friends at breakfast, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened. But I could see it in her eyes: the mask was slipping, and the cracks were showing. Her laughter didn't reach her eyes as it once did. She was pretending to be fine, pretending everything was normal, but I could sense the tension still hanging in the air. I didn't join them. Instead, I spent the morning walking along the beach, trying to clear my mind. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, its waves crashing softly against the shore. I needed to think. I needed to figure out where my life was headed. As I walked back to the resort, the realization hit me: Elena and I were no longer on the same path. I had been living in a facade, hoping things would improve, but they hadn't. They were getting worse. And now, with the tension hanging over us, I knew it was time to make a decision. Back at the suite, I tried to push the thoughts away, but they lingered. I had to act. The resort had once seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start, but now it felt like a cage, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I called my lawyer, Rachel, an efficient woman I had known for years. She was straightforward, no nonsense, and I trusted her. "I'm ready to move forward," I said when she picked up. "Understood," Rachel replied. "We'll start with the financials. Have you cancelled her access to the accounts?" "Yes," I confirmed. "She doesn't have access to anything anymore." Rachel paused for a moment. "This won't be easy, Nathan. Are you prepared for what comes next?" I hesitated for a moment before answering. "I am." When I hung up, I felt a sense of finality. I was done with the games, done with the pretending. Elena's behavior, her manipulation, and the way she had turned our marriage into a performance had pushed me to this point. The truth was, I had been holding on to a lie for too long, and it was time to let go. That evening, Elena tried to pull me back in. As we were sitting in the suite, she suddenly turned to me, her expression softening. "Nathan, can we talk?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. I turned to her, expecting another round of excuses, another attempt to convince me everything would be okay. But this time, I couldn't ignore the feeling that she wasn't just trying to smooth things over. "I've been thinking," she began, "about what you said. About us. Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been too focused on the wrong things. I want to try to fix things. I don't want to lose you." Her words felt rehearsed, too polished. I didn't want to hear any more empty promises. My heart had been shattered too many times to believe her now. "Elena," I said, cutting her off, "this isn't about fixing things. It's about being honest with each other. It's about respect. You've been living in a world of your own making, and I've been nothing more than an accessory." Her face fell, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of vulnerability. But it was too little, too late. "I'm done," I said, my voice firm, no longer uncertain. "I'm leaving." Elena looked at me with wide eyes, disbelief written all over her face. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," I replied, standing up. "I'm done pretending. I'll be staying somewhere else for the rest of the trip. When we get back to San Francisco, we'll figure out the next steps." Her expression twisted, a mix of anger and shock. "You can't just leave." "Watch me," I said, grabbing my suitcase. "I'm done." Leaving that suite was the hardest thing I had ever done, but at the same time, it was incredibly liberating. For years, I had been trapped in a relationship where I was constantly trying to please Elena, constantly trying to fix things that were broken beyond repair. But now, as I walked away from her and the life we had built, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I checked into a small hotel a few miles away, far from the luxury of Oasis Heights. The simplicity of the room, the quietness, was a stark contrast to the opulence of the resort. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe. I sat by the window, watching the sunset over the bay, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to think about what I wanted. The phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew it was Elena, probably filled with accusations and pleas. But I had no intention of answering. For the first time, I was putting myself first. The next morning, I called my parents to check on Sophie and Leo. Their voices were like a breath of fresh air, a reminder of why I had made the choice to leave. Sophie's laughter rang out through the phone as she excitedly told me about a game she had played with her grandparents. Leo's voice was quieter but still filled with energy as he described a new book he had started reading. Everything seemed so simple with them. They were happy, they were safe, and they didn't have to witness the chaos of my relationship with Elena. That's all that mattered now. "Everything okay?" my mom asked, her tone laced with concern. "It will be," I replied, my voice steady. "I just needed to get away for a bit." "But they're good?" "They're great," she said. "And you?" I paused for a moment. "I'm good. I just needed to figure some things out." "Take care of yourself, Nathan," she said softly. "We're here if you need anything." After the call ended, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. My parents didn't know the full story, and I wasn't ready to share it with them just yet. I didn't want them to worry, especially not when Sophie and Leo were adjusting so well. Meanwhile, back at the resort, Elena was facing the consequences of her actions. Without me there to pay for the lavish experiences she had grown accustomed to, her friends began to grow impatient. When she tried to reserve a private cabana for her group, the request was swiftly declined. Elena tried to brush it off with a strained laugh, but the damage had already been done. As the days went on, I received more updates from Rachel, my lawyer. We were moving forward with the divorce. The process wasn't going to be quick or easy, but I was ready for it. There was no going back now. That evening, I received a text from Elena. It was short, but it hit me harder than I expected. "Nathan, we need to talk. Please." I stared at the screen for a few moments before deciding to respond. There was no going back, but I also knew I couldn't ignore the conversation. "I'm not coming back to the resort. I've made my decision. It's over." I turned my phone off after that, refusing to engage further. There was nothing left to say. Elena's manipulation, her obsession with appearances, had finally pushed me to a breaking point. She hadn't just hurt me, she had hurt our children, our family, and herself. And while I had no intention of being cruel, I also knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything would be fine. A few hours later, I received a call from Caleb, Elena's brother. He sounded frustrated, his voice filled with exasperation. "Nathan, she's a mess. She's blaming you for everything. She says you're making her look like the villain." I rubbed my temples, trying to hold back my frustration. "Caleb, I'm not making her do anything. She's the one who decided this path." "I know, man," he sighed. "But she won't listen to anyone. She's spiraling. And you need to be careful. She's starting to lose control of everything, and I'm worried about her." I paused. Caleb had always been protective of his sister, even if he had his own reservations about her actions. "I can't help her anymore, Caleb," I said firmly. "She's made her choices, and I'm done cleaning up her mess." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment, before Caleb finally spoke. "I get it. Just, take care of yourself, okay?" "I will. Thanks, Caleb." The next day, I received another call from Rachel. "The paperwork is ready, Nathan. We can proceed with filing tomorrow." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The divorce was becoming a reality, and I was no longer trapped in the cycle of manipulation and lies. Elena's world was unraveling, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking control of my own future. As the week came to an end, I took one last walk on the beach, letting the sound of the waves calm my mind. The resort had lost its charm for me, and there was nothing left to hold on to. Elena had made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. When I returned to my hotel, I packed up my things and made my way back to San Francisco. I was going home, truly home, to a life that was mine to rebuild, a life that didn't involve pretending for anyone else. Back in San Francisco, I focused on rebuilding the pieces of my life that had shattered over the past few months. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Sophie and Leo settled back into their routine, and I made it my priority to be there for them, to show them that, despite everything, we were going to be okay. The transition wasn't perfect, but the love and support we had as a family was more than enough. I also began to focus on myself, on rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage to Elena. I resumed my morning runs, something I had neglected during the last few years of trying to balance work and family. It felt good to be moving again, to feel my body and mind reconnecting. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, I just needed to be at peace with myself. One day, after a run, I bumped into an old friend at a cafe. Mark, a former college roommate, was sitting outside, sipping coffee. He looked up when I walked by and waved me over. "Nathan. It's been too long," he said with a wide smile. "How've you been?" We caught up over coffee, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was having a real conversation. Mark didn't ask about my career or my personal life right away, instead, he just wanted to know how I was doing. It was refreshing. Over the next few weeks, Mark and I reconnected, and he introduced me to a new circle of friends who weren't interested in status or appearances. They were real, grounded, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could be myself around people who didn't have ulterior motives. As I spent more time with Sophie and Leo, I also met Sophie's mother, Lily. She was a kind, understanding woman, and the two of them got along instantly. It felt good to be surrounded by people who supported me, who weren't trying to manipulate or control the narrative. Then one evening, after spending time with my kids and Lily, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. For the first time since I left Elena, I could finally see the future more clearly. It wasn't about fixing the past, it was about moving forward, step by step. Elena's attempts to reach out had become less frequent. She would send me the occasional message, but I had made it clear that I wasn't interested in any more conversations. The chapter had closed. She was still trying to rebuild her own life, but it felt like an act, a last-ditch effort to maintain control over a world that was no longer hers. One day, I got a call from her. I almost didn't pick it up, but something made me do it. "Hi, Nathan," Elena said, her voice sounding different, quieter. "I wanted to check on the kids. I know it's been a while." I felt a pang of sadness but quickly pushed it aside. "They're doing well, Elena. They're adjusting." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Elena spoke again, her voice softer than usual. "I've been working on myself. I've been seeing a therapist, and I think I finally understand where I went wrong. I don't want to be the person I was." I took a deep breath, unsure how to respond. "I hope you find peace, Elena," I said quietly. "But the truth is, I can't go back to what we were." "I understand," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm sorry, Nathan." The call ended, and I put my phone down, a mix of relief and sadness filling me. Elena had made a lot of mistakes, but she was finally taking responsibility for them. It didn't change anything for me. I was done, and I was moving on. But it was still good to hear that she had acknowledged her part in the mess we had become. As the weeks passed, my relationship with Sophie deepened. We started to explore the city together, going on hikes, visiting local parks, and enjoying the simple pleasures of life that I had neglected for so long. For the first time, I was able to be present, to be fully invested in my own life and in the lives of those I cared about. One evening, while we were sitting on the couch after dinner, Sophie looked at me and smiled. "You know," she said, "I've never seen you this happy before." I smiled back, feeling something warm and genuine spread through me. "I'm happy because I'm finally being true to myself." Sophie leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. "I'm glad you're here with us, Nathan. You deserve to be happy."